it's time now for us to really get down to business and focus on Birmingham. And so I am really, really delighted and grateful that a very busy Kevin Crompton and Pauline Maddison, who has recently joined us in the interim AD role for SEND, are going to come and take the conversation on. Debbie Holmes is also going to join us, and they can say a little bit more about themselves, but we're grateful to Kevin, to Pauline and to Debbie for taking this time out now to talk through some of what's happening centrally in the city, and from that we will then drill down into a little bit of the how. So Kevin, thank you, and over to you.
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully they're going to put some slides up in a minute for me. I was really interested in John's conversation. I didn't expect the previous speaker to do a biopic of my whole career, but I recognised I lived through half that, including working on the national curriculum and so on. And I just want to start my brief presentation with just another little bit of nostalgia. I'm speaking to you from an office in Margaret Street, which used to be the office of my boss, Nick Honeysett, when I was appointed here in the 90s to run something called the Curriculum Support Service. And this is just for any of you around at the time, a bit of a memory jog. The Curriculum Support Service was set up when the funding for advisory teachers was delegated to schools. And basically my job was to create a service with colleagues that schools would buy back into, that would support teachers in schools. And I can tell you one of the best things I ever did was to help govern that service. I set up a governing body with head teachers from the city, and I'll come back to that shortly. I think we did some pretty good stuff in those days. We did a lot of work that's now quite common, but identifying good practitioners in schools and facilitating them to share their skills and experience with teachers in other schools, for example. And of course, we worked alongside at the time something called the Birmingham Advisory Support Service, headed by colleague David Woods. Maybe somebody out there do remember him as well. But the important thing about that is BAS was at that time centrally funded. So the city had an advisory service working with schools that was centrally funded, and it was a significant factor, I think, in the work we did at the time. And of course, we had the leadership of Tim Brighouse. And at the time, Birmingham did really innovative things with our schools. Year of reading, year of maths, year of IT, and a host of other activities. And John also reminded me in a funny sort of way, we also, because I was seconded at the time to the teacher training agency, where we worked on different teacher standards to raise the standards we set up the MPQ8. So interesting times. But the two initials at the bottom are a test for anybody out there. If anyone can tell me what Trist and Grist means, I'll save you the bother. This was TVI related in-service training. It was a grant that we had. And Grist, I think, was grant related initial teacher training and so on. That was the funding we used at the time. But if we can go to slide 2, please. My overwhelming reflection, if I can get slide 2, of this is what made success was partnership and a sense of common endeavour driven by a commitment to the best outcomes for children and young people, families and carers. It was something we all seemed to share. Every head teacher I knew, teacher, service, and of course Tim's motto was all about learning to do better what we already did well. So coming back to the city, if I'd have the next slide 3, please, slide 3. 20 years later, well, as John has just shown, structures have changed enormously over that I can't even say the word, academization has happened. And also, I think it's interesting trying to reflect on the role of the council in terms of its contribution to the leadership and support to make effective schools and have great teaching and learning in every school. I think Birmingham, like many authorities, has been challenged through austerity in what you do. But I think my successor, Sue Harrison, does inherit some really good building blocks. There is the Birmingham Education Partnership, facilitating the network John has just told us is so important. We've got the Developing Local Provision project, which I think is really significant in terms of how we might work together to tackle some of the issues in SEND. We've still got a school improvement grant that I think the city can reflect on how we use that. And of course, we get other grants occasionally, like we've just got Pupil Premium Plus, which is going to help facilitate a project which will look at post-16 pupils and helping them on the pathway into work, including SEND pupils. And of course, the big thing we've still got between us is the DSG, the higher needs block, including the monies for SEND that are delegated schools, pupil premium, and so on. So we've still got an awful lot of levers, but those levers are more shared between us now. So what's going to be the secret of going forward? Can we go back to slide 2, please? Partnership and a common sense of common endeavour driven by commitment to the best outcomes of children, young people, families and carers. And that really is the summary of my presentation. I think the city is delicately poised. There are a lot of challenges, but I think when Sue, the new director, comes in, I think she takes the time to just refresh that relationship, just reset it. I think we can do even better than we're doing now. And I do understand and recognise there's a lot of good stuff being done in partnership at the moment. But this is a one-slide presentation. Partnership, sense of common endeavour driven by commitment to the best outcomes for children, young people, families and carers. And we will need that more than ever as we face up to the challenges that we've got in the SEND agenda at the moment. And with no further ado, I think I hand over to Pauline Maddison, my partner in crime. I think you're on mute, Pauline.
Apologies, I'm so used to doing Teams. I'm looking at the top saying, where's my mute button? Nostalgia, 20 years ago, I got my first Director of Education job in London, although you can tell by my accent, I'm from the Northeast. And in those days, Birmingham was the place everybody aspired to be. Why? Obviously, because of Tim Brighouse and David Woods, who David was, I had the privilege of working with, in fact, working to 21 years ago with Estelle Morris, who was my minister at the time. And it was an absolute joy, and the aspiration and the determination and the ownership of children in Birmingham was a joy to behold. And then I went on to work with Tim for London Challenge, and it was a very, very exciting time. And right the way through that, as Kevin has said, it's about partnership. It's Kevin's slide that's about everybody working together to own as well as support the children of Birmingham, the children and their families. But I compare that, if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So that partnership is about trust and communication, particularly with head teachers. It's absolutely vital for SEND. And I'm very conscious that from what many heads have told me, that particularly that trust is not there. And that trust isn't just about the statutory. There's an awful lot of discussion here about statutory and children with plans, but it's far beyond that, because actually it's about school improvement. And that's why I'm really keen to work with Beth. It is about school improvement, and it's about how our young people get the best quality of teaching, which is fundamental ingredient to school improvement. But I go back and say now, as far as I can see, certainly from my staff, everybody is committed to improvement in SEND, and I think most Birmingham schools, from what I can hear, are committed to that improvement. But what is different from 20 years ago is that Birmingham is not a place people want to come to on SEND. management consultants have an impossible job trying to persuade people to come here. It's renowned for not just poor practice, because we've seen that from Ofsted, but actually that lack of togetherness, that lack of partnership. And that's what somehow we've got to try and develop. It will take a long time, but get back to the position where Birmingham is held in such high esteem. So how are we progressing on SEND? Well, we've got a commissioner, John Coughlin, who we've met and is clear of his role. We've got a SEND improvement board that he will chair, and head teachers have places on that board. And we have now submitted last week the accelerated progress plan. That plan with priorities that we've had the opportunity to discuss with head teachers in the last 2 weeks. We've had to take the Ofsted areas of insufficient progress, but we've actually grouped them in such a way that they're easy to deal with, and they're very obvious. System leadership about the services working together, health, the Children's Partnership, the Children's Trust, and obviously colleagues in the council, including workforce development, people working together to actually do integrated commissioning. And that builds trust. A big one for me, which is getting the basics right. That's improving the practice, restructuring SENAR, and ensuring that we actually are following the code of practice. We have been woefully understaffed. The staffing levels of SENAR are comparable to an authority a quarter of the size of Birmingham. Their caseloads are impossible. You couldn't possibly run a service on that. So clearly that's an absolute imperative to actually get that service right. And I'll come back to that one. Our IT system, not so much the IT system itself, but the software we use needs to be updated. And we need a complete review of the high needs block to make sure that we're using it as effectively as possible. And I'll come back on that one as well. That is absolutely fundamental if we are going to gain your trust, but actually be able to pass any of the expectations of the commissioner. We need to build trust by co-production, by communication, by partnership working with yourselves, partnership working with parents. And actually, it's not just engaging, it's actually listening and actually really co-producing things rather than telling you after the event or not telling you at all. And that's a really big one on communication. And we need to look at children's achievements and attainment. We would call that through the whole of the sort of inclusion strategy. But it's about how young people with SEND, not just with plans. I think I do want to really stress that we're not just talking about children with plans here. We're talking about all children with SEND, how we can improve their pathways so that they can actually achieve, in the wider sense of the achievement, as highly as possible. Clearly, another criticism that Ofsted had. So what we've got right, we've got some of it right, what we've done so far. We've restructured SENAR. We're still a long way from at the point at which we can actually give you all the information there, but we've restructured that. We've gone back on what was the previous regime that, to be honest, didn't really work. By last Friday, we've appointed 22 new case officers in the last fortnight. They won't come into position, with once DBS has followed through, etc. until November, but that will enable our caseloads to reduce, communication to be much better. And we have started a detailed bit of work led by SIPFA in terms of finances. We're also actually, and you should have had a communication at the end of last week from Joe Condon, head of SEND, in terms of how we've put new staff on, or not new to Birmingham, but different staff, to actually ensure that we can get those resources into schools that are attached to provision support plans. We've also appointed a co-production officer who will work in terms of, is a specialist in co-production. What co-production means. Co-production does not mean everybody gets what they want. And I think that's one of the key issues, of course, in terms of sometimes people think it is. But actually looking at the ground rules, if you like, on co-production, and ensuring that everything we do in the future actually has a co-production element within it. So we've actually appointed that person. We are about to we're halfway through work on a SEND sufficiency strategy, and we'll be coming out to you on that. That's absolutely imperative, which gives you planning for a few years, which is not just places in special schools. I want to reiterate, this is about big time in terms of mainstream as well, both support bases that might be led by special schools, or support bases, resource bases that are within the school, mainstream school itself, but looking at that sense of efficiency. And we're nearly at a point where we can start to actually talk with you when we've got all of the information there. And I hope you will find, for secondary colleagues particularly, that we have improved our transitioning arrangements for those transition points of early years into reception, Y1 into Y2, and particularly 6 into 7. We were well out of timescale last year. While we met the statutory, it didn't help yourselves because we didn't actually fall within the same timescale as our admission colleagues. We'll be slightly out this time around because you should have started back in April to get it right. We will definitely get it right for September 23, but we'll nearly get it right for September 22, which will make life, particularly for secondary colleagues, much easier as well. So we have moved on, and we will be bringing, we're going to call them newsletters for sake of argument, but whatever we decide to call them, every 6 weeks to you, so that you see that constant level of improvement, because it's absolutely vital. So I suppose I want to finish off and go back 20 years ago. Birmingham was the place you aspired to be. When we've moved on with this programme, which will take some time, it would be great if, particularly on SEND, that when management consultants ring people, that's where outstanding people want to work as well. They don't at the moment. And I think if we can achieve that, that means that there's a fantastic excitement in this city that will mean that absolutely every part of the SEND landscape, if you like, has improved. And I look forward to working with Beth on that.
Pauline, thank you ever so much. Is Debbie Holmes joining us? Do we know?
She is.
Brilliant.
She is.
Wonderful.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi there.
Well, can I welcome Debbie Holmes? Many of you who've worked on DLP will know that Debbie has been the brains behind a lot of it. First of all, Kevin and Pauline, thank you for that overview and for the affirmation of the importance of working together. You didn't say a great deal, Kevin, about a new 7-year contract that Beth's very pleased to have. We wrote into our tender an absolute desire to build trust and close working with the council in every way possible. And we're really glad that you're here as the other side of that. So thank you.
Sorry to have omitted that, Tim. No, congratulations. We're delighted, and it was the best bid, and we're looking forward to taking it forward with you.
Thank you. And so what Debbie brings to this is the fact that through this transition, the DLP has been a strand of work that has successfully reflected some of that trust building, bringing people together, co-constructing, and has given our planning in BEP some of the shape that we now have for our school improvement working. So Debbie, thank you, and over to you.
Okay, so yes, just to introduce myself quickly, I'm Debbie Holmes. I have been working in Birmingham for the last year, working really closely with Tim and working really closely with our head teachers to roll out the DLP project, which was a 2-year pilot project. It's a school-led project, and it's about developing the mainstream provision across Birmingham schools. If we could just go on to the next slide, Tim. Okay, I thought it was probably useful just before I give an update on where we've got to, just to recap what we set out to do with the DLP and what the DLP is all about. So it is about mainstream schools taking the lead. It's about them leading the system. It is about them working in partnership, and it is about them working in partnership to develop their SEND provision across their localities, so across their community of schools. And it's very much focused on improving the outcomes for children and young people with SEND. And before the need for an EHCP. And when I first started giving these presentations, I said that, and then I dropped this out of the presentation because it was open to misinterpretation, and it caused some concern in that we might be trying to stop children getting an EHCP. And it's absolutely not what the DLP is about. It's just about trying to put the money in the hands of school leaders earlier in the process so that they can access their resources easily and earlier, which enables them themselves to identify and intervene with children and young people with SEND before they have to go through the whole EHCP process. It's also about, and it has been about in Birmingham, our partnerships of schools using performance data, which has had its challenges through COVID, but the schools have actually produced their live data. They've used their current data. We've given them contextual information about their localities of schools across the performance of schools across their localities. They've audited their needs. They've included the views of parents and carers and children and young people. And as a result, they've identified across their partnerships their priorities and their needs, which look different, very different across Birmingham. It's also involved them identifying their local partners and expertise, and working with local partners and our own experts to source and commission the resources that they need. So to do that themselves without having to come through us initially. We've been really proud of the way that schools have worked hard to identify the baselines, particularly in the context of no performance data. And they've done a tremendous job in that we have got really hard, tight targets set, and we've got really tight baselines around improving, for example, or reducing the number of children on part-time timetables. We've got performance and progress targets around children in early years. We've got targets for reducing exclusions. So they look different across all the different consortium networks, but they have all got really tight targets. And that is how we would want it, because the needs are different in different parts of Birmingham, of course. And it's also been about those consortium networks setting up and monitoring systems, tracking systems for how they're going to show the progress. And they have all accepted the accountability for reporting on the impact of the spend, but also on their progress against the targets termly. So we're really pleased that we've got that far. If we can go on onto the next slide, please. Just to reiterate, it's absolutely not an attempt to stop pupils getting an EHCP who need one. And certainly when we talked to the Parent Carer Forum, they did agree that sometimes they've been forced down that EHCP route because the provision hasn't been good enough, the needs have got worse, or they haven't been able to access resources, so they've been forced into that. Of course, there are, and there always will be, a proportion of children that need an EHCP, and we absolutely promote that, and will be, nothing there will change. But this is about trying to get resources in earlier. And we're absolutely not trying to stop pupils going to special schools, far from it. But what some of the special schools themselves are telling us is that they have had some children who probably, with some support from themselves, could have stayed in mainstream schools or could have stayed in the locality in which they live. We have included all schools. We have asked all schools, regardless of context. So it doesn't matter if you're an Ofsted category, it doesn't matter if you're a free school or an academy or a mainstream school. The whole point of this project is that schools work together and sort of compensate for each other's strengths and weaknesses, so that actually they work together collaboratively and maximise their resources. If we could go on to the next slide. Why are we doing it? Nationally and Ofsted reports are showing that provision and outcomes for children on SEND support, and also that quality first teaching isn't as effective as it should be. It was one of the weaknesses that they identified of the 2014 reforms. We know that the progress and outcomes, well, actually, I say we don't know well enough, but we're fairly confident that the progress and outcomes for pupils with SEND in mainstream schools and without an EHCP in Birmingham are weak, and they are weak nationally. I say that with caution, because actually we don't have really robust systems. We haven't had really robust systems for gathering that data and monitoring that progress. But we were very clearly told by Ofsted that it's not good enough, and we had ascertained that ourselves. We've got high numbers of children and young people with EHCPs. But we've got lower numbers and percentages of children and young people with SEND supported in mainstream settings. So over time, we have more and more children with EHCPs have ended up in special schools. And we've got more regionally more than other regions and nationally. And that's not saying we've got the wrong people, but we do have some children who should be in mainstream. And when we looked at our mainstream data, we've certainly got lower numbers of children with EHCPs in our mainstream settings. And we're also doing it because we want to get really robust school improvement strategies around SEND and really bring the focus of SEND into school improvement, rather than, you know, it's about accessing resource. Okay, could we move on? So what does it look like? It hasn't been without its challenges, so I'm not going to give a rosy picture of how it's all been brilliant and we're happy ever after, but we are really happy with where we've got to. Obviously, it was a major undertaking because we're changing a culture. We're changing of the way that schools work around SEND. We were asking head teachers to come to the table to talk about SEND rather than SENCOs. And we were working in a pandemic when actually head teachers had a million other things on their mind and to be dealing with. But also there were significant periods where either schools weren't open or staff were absent or children weren't in. So it hasn't been without its challenges, but we are really delighted in the way that heads and schools have worked around this. We've got a way to go. And I'm sure we'll have challenges going forward, but we did just want to sort of show where we've got to, and to show how what we've been doing does align with the sorts of things that John's been talking about and Kevin was hoping that we're aspiring to in Birmingham. So if we could move on to the next slide. Okay, so we're delighted to say that every consortia across Birmingham has gone through the process. They've used their data, they've identified their priorities, they've commissioned their resources, they've got their funding, and they're rolling every consortia bar one, which we're working with next week. And this sort of shows you how the areas all identified different needs, which is the whole strength of DLP. It's not a blanket approach because different areas have different priorities. But all of these projects are now underway Like I say, they're all funded and they've all got targets, and that's a huge achievement on behalf of the heads, because it has been the heads that have been driving this, and it has been about head teachers working together and supporting and challenging each other. So we've got that's the primary consortia, that's all the partnerships across Birmingham. If we can just go on to the next slide. These are all the secondary networks. Again, you'll see they've got, these were the priorities that they've identified. Some of the secondaries have 2 or 3 projects running, but again, they've been through a massive process, and we are really pleased about where it's got to. Like I say, we know we've got some challenges ahead, but it's fantastic achievement on behalf of our head teachers, and they have worked really hard against all the odds. So we're feeling really optimistic about this so far. Next slide, please. Another really exciting development is through the DLP funding, we funded the special schools to work with us and a consultant to work up a special school outreach offer. Again, it's school-led. It's been led by Simon Harris, who I think is in the room. And again, it's been really good to work with the special schools, who are now going to be able to offer outreach to our mainstream schools. It will provide additional capacity, so we'll have more resource to support our mainstream schools. And we're doing a funded pilot project initially. We're really confident, and we're really hoping that this becomes a firm offer. But also, in the spirit of DLP and in the spirit of a school-led project, we're really hoping that mainstream schools start to look at their SEM budgets and start to think, actually, before I embark on all the bureaucracy around sort of going to the next stage, maybe I'll go to the special schools and see if I can commission some school-to-school support. So we're hoping that, yes, there will be local authority funding around this, but also that schools will start to work together. And certainly we've been really pleased, because increasingly along the way, the special schools have got involved in the DLP projects. But now this is an additional offer where we're really excited about this. They have been working alongside our own team, so there's not a conflict of interest. And I think in the authority, we're all really pleased that we've now got this additional capacity and resource. If we can just go on to the next slide. I don't know if Simon's doing a bit more talking about it later, but just to say, the offer could include any of these. And like I say, we will be commissioning some of it, but there is the opportunities for schools to commission it directly. And they're offering training to support all settings and SEND pupils, helping them to promote inclusive practice, getting those children with complex needs actually really included, support with teaching and learning, support with the curriculum, working in partnership to use other professionals and other expertise, and also supporting the schools to really help those pupils with SEND to have a voice, and the parents and carers to have a voice in developing their provision. So we're really excited about that as an offer, and we're ready to roll that out in September. And next slide, please. Just, Tim, I've only got one more slide, so I know we're overrunning slightly, but just the other projects that we've funded through the DLP, we've got a funding stream for nurseries and PVIs who are replicating the mainstream school process, and they are at this moment just getting their proposals and bids together across their 10 districts. They're going through exactly the same process. We're funding a piece of work for secondary pupils who are not on roll of a school, and again, that's a school-led project with the schools working with our local authority teams to get some of those pupils who are not on a roll back into school. And also a post-16 project working with the universities and some of our post-16 providers, and also our local authority teams to work up a sector-led project around developing and improving provision. And that is a huge gap in Birmingham, and it's where a lot of the children drop off the edge. So just finally, if we could just go to the next slide. Why is it significant? We're not over-egging our project. It is significant because it's enabled us to really strengthen the infrastructure that was already here, and really strengthen the discussions and the ways of working across the primary consortia and the secondary networks. And we have seen the schools really working well together. and that's been great, but it's really strengthened it. We think it's also, in strengthening that, we think it's set up a potential receptacle to facilitate future ways of working for other teams and organisations and projects, because it's really worked for this project where we've got the schools in partnership working together. They're used to meeting together, they're used to supporting and challenging each other, and they've used the data really well. So we're hoping that that's a model we've set up. And certainly it really helps because obviously Beth will be delivering their school improvement strategy through the consortia and networks. It's been significant because it has resulted in schools approaching partners and experts and agencies in their locality without us. So they've set up their own partnerships, and that's included health, as well as sort of the voluntary sector. We're really pleased that targets have been set, and they are going to be tracked and measured. And I think the bit for us that is the most gratifying is that how schools have picked it up against the odds. We know that schools didn't have confidence in Birmingham, in the SEND, and they certainly were quite sceptical about this, and probably some still are, but we're really pleased that actually schools have led this and taken it on and accepted responsibility, and have totally, head teachers have been taking the lead. And I say instead of Senkos, that's not because I don't value Senkos, but it's just been great to have head teachers at the table having these discussions. And I think it's also significant because if we look back at what John was saying and how Pauline's talking and what Kevin wants for Birmingham, hopefully we've really aligned ourselves with that model. And certainly in the middle of rolling the project out, the DFE rolled out their proposed model for funding SEND. And I certainly know that in some of the outer London boroughs, some of this has happened already, but they're saying that actually going forward, they're hoping to use the groups of schools model to fund SEND projects in the future. So I think we're really well placed because if they come to Birmingham, we can drop it straight in. We haven't got to set all of this up. So like I say, it's had its challenges. We still will have our challenges, but it has been great to work with the schools. And we have been really grateful for the support of head teachers in helping us to roll this out. Okay, Tim, that's me done. I'll hand back.
Thank you very, very much, Debbie.